Hello world, take two. I started earlier for about 30 seconds here and I kind of messed up the camera. So anyways, I'm standing on the Emmitsburg Road in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania on the Gettysburg National Battlefield. And you can see there's two fence lines on this road. And I'm going to tie this all in with climate change. But as you see from a distance, down there is the Virginia Monument where Robert E. Lee stood during Pickett's Charge, which was the third day's battle of Gettysburg on July 3rd, 1863. The Confederates were in rebellion against the United States, and he was the head of the Army in Northern Virginia. So this Emmitsburg, the Pickett's Charge, they started back there on the tree line, which is called Seminary Ridge, and they attacked a position up here. It's called Cemetery Ridge. And as you can see that the road is now no longer a farmer's path, but rather a busy road. But that's Cemetery Ridge, and the Confederates, led by Pickett, attacked from that position on Seminary Ridge to Cemetery Ridge. And this place here was Emmitsburg Road, and the Confederate soldiers, there were 15,000 of them, were attacking, led by Pickett. And they ended up with 6,000 casualties. And let's see here, the Union had 1,500 casualties on their end, but the Confederates had 6,000 out of 15,000 soldiers were casualties during this attack. Back at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, there were 150 cannons firing for 2 hours from the Confederate side, and the Union returned fire for a while and then held their ammunition, and there were 75 cannons there. So you're looking at 225 cannons. And the story was that, you could hear the cannonade all the way to Philadelphia, some 100-some miles away. And yet some places here in just outside of town, 10 miles away, you couldn't hear it at all because of the topography of the land. So the battle line with these 15,000 soldiers was 1.5 miles wide, and which is 2.4 kilometers for you in kilometer miles. And the goal was to attack this area of the Union line, and it was an uphill fight. They were attacking a defensive position, and it was poorly planned. This is an example of bad planning, which is just like climate change. Bad planning, terrible analysis of the situation, uphill against a fortified defense, and not listening to your subordinates. So this place here, the Emmitsburg Road, was horrible because on this side you had the post rail fence, which is kind of like this, and it was 5 rails tall, so they did a good job, historically speaking. And the Confederates were being shot at the whole time with cannons and musket fire and rifle fire. And then across the road was a post and board situation where it was another fence, and this was a sunken road here on Emmitsburg Road. And this was post and board, so they had to break this down while they're getting shot at from all angles, all the way from Little Round Top over there, and all the way from the end of the Union line up there for this part of the battle. And they had to break this fence down. The guy's 5'2" was the average height of the soldier back then. So they had to break down this fence, which was really fortified pretty heavily, so they're getting massacred at this point. And this planning here was just horrible. I mean, it was just... these guys were idiots that did this, and Lee was a dummy, thank God, because this was a breaking point for the Confederates. They went on for another 2 years of fighting, but this was called the high water mark of the Confederacy. So they wanted to go up towards this angle up here, and this is 200 steps up here, and it's a fortified defensive position, and it's really bad planning on the part of the Confederates, and they should not have done it, but thank God they did, because it really did break them. So it gives you an idea how far I'm looking here. That's 200 strides up to there, and it was a total of 3/4 of a mile from the Virginia Monument up to this point here. So it's nothing but an enfilade of cannons and rifle fire the whole time. So how's this tying with climate change? Well, it really does. This is bad planning, attacking a fortified position, which is climate change. I mean, it's really heavily fortified. And if you don't have a good plan how to do it and get around it and do a good job, you're just going to smash yourself up against the rocks of that are keeping you from making any success. So they didn't listen to subordinates. That's what it came down to. And he went forward with his battle because he had his dander up. Now with climate change, there's no plan at all. There's no plan and no actions, and those actions that are being done right now are poorly thought out, and it's just not there's no plans as to how to battle climate change at all by all the world's governments, especially here in the United States. any plans are mediocre plans to adjust. Nothing is suggested how to combat climate change. Yeah, they'll do whatever infrastructure and things like that, but even worse than the plans to combat climate change is they're not engaged in situations to reduce carbon dioxide in the atmosphere or battle climate change itself. There's no ban on drilling on federal land. The Willow Project in Alaska is proceeding on, which is a horrendous project in Alaska. 80 million acres in the Gulf of Mexico has been authorized for drilling by the Biden administration. And he recently came back from Saudi Arabia, basically begging the Saudis to produce more oil for the world. So it's horrible. Right now, Europe is also doing gas and oil production and research into how to get more oil out of the ground. China and India are heavily invested in coal, and the Russians are looking forward to climate change because they feel they will get over their winters and now it'll be livable in Siberia and all. So Joe Biden came back from the July 20th trip to Saudi Arabia and stood in front of a dilapidated area and declared that the world and the United States is in an emergency situation, and he said it's an existential threat. Well, the term existential means you're going to go extinct right away, and you're in big trouble, and it's apparent, it's in your face, it's life-threatening, and we need to do something immediately. But he did not declare a national emergency, and the world has not declared a worldwide climate change emergency. A national emergency would have done a ban on the exporting of oil, would have stopped offshore drilling on federal lands. Corporate entities and groups would not be able to operate in third world, in other worlds and invest in places like Nigeria for oil and things like that if they did a national emergency. Instead, he proposed, and he's going to authorize $2.3 billion for infrastructure, which is needed, but that's not what the problem is. It does nothing to address climate change. It's just a continuation of what they had tanked in Congress, which was the Green New Deal. And the Green New Deal did nothing to reduce carbon dioxide in the atmosphere or get us off fossil fuels and things like that. It's a mealy-mouthed program that does not go anywhere, does not go far enough. It does some green technology, but it's little bits and pieces rather than attacking a full one in the face. It'd be kind of like attacking this position right now and just kind of like having squirt guns shooting at everyone coming up the hill at you. And it's insane what's going on right now. And it's not just the USA being buffoons. That's worldwide. Right now in the USA, we're having droughts, fires, record heat. Europe's having record heat. They just got through a giant heat wave, and all the way up in the UK and also up into Scotland. France has had issues. Spain and Portugal are on fire. Greece is on fire. Italy's having severe issues. The rivers in Europe, the Rhine River is inches away from being unnavigable. The Po River is basically dried up in Italy. Japan's going through heat waves and floods. Thailand just went through a massive flood. China's having massive floods and heat and even tornadoes. Africa is on the brink of starvation, or the people are starving right now. Entire villages have packed up and left their homeland area and had to move somewhere else. These are all climate change refugees. Central America, El Salvador just had massive floods. You got Bolsonaro down in the rainforest of Brazil. He's authorized massive amounts of cutting down of the rainforest, and they're having, as a result of that, fires, drought. It's upsetting the whole climatological system there. And it will collapse eventually. They're going to get to the point where the rainforest that relies on each other for rain and everything, and once you start removing a certain number of trees, there's going to be a tipping point where the rainforest just fails altogether. And what happens also is that the rainforest in Brazil, what happens there affects the rest of the world for the climate as well. It's kind of like the butterfly effect. It just, everything affects everything else. So there's a delay between carbon dioxide in the atmosphere of 10 to 30 years. So this heat wave we just recently experienced, if you average, say, 20 years for a delay between carbon dioxide and temperature catching up, if you factor in this recent heat wave and what's going on worldwide with heat, you're living in the year 2002. This is before 2007 when the iPhones started coming online and China started cranking out the production and putting a new coal plant online once a week. It was just insane what was going on back then, and it's still happening now. Carbon dioxide went across, we're at 420 parts per million, give or take. When last time carbon dioxide was 400 parts per million, oceans were 70 feet higher. Okay, so there's this delay between temperature and the effects of that temperature affecting everything else. And oceans were 70 feet higher because you had melting glaciers and everything. And temperatures were 3 degrees Celsius warmer. So this is what's coming our way. We're living in the year 2002 right now. We're behind by 20 years, and the carbon dioxide in this atmosphere right now is at 420 parts per million, not 400 parts per million. And we're in for a hellscape coming up. And these buffoonish, evil people in charge, because you have to say evil at this point, because they know what's happening. If I know what's happening, they've known what's happening for years. And this is worldwide, not just the United States, but the United States is a prime example of greed and corruption ruling the day rather than logic and going, if it's an existential threat, it's right in your face, needs to happen right now, we need to get on this thing, but they're not going to. So CO2 right now, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, will drop until September now, since it's summertime and the trees have come online and they're sucking carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It'll drop down to 414 parts per million, somewhere in there by the end of September. And then it starts going up in October. And next time, instead of being 420 parts per million, 422, it's going to be 425, 424, maybe even it'll briefly touch 428, 430. Now, what's the significance of that? Well, at 420 parts per million, only 280 parts per million is the safe zone. That's basically 280 and below. That's where temperatures don't really go up or down, and it's kind of mild, and it's what we have lived in as humans for the last 140,000 years. So 280 parts per million is a safe zone, and we're at 420 parts per million. So the risk we're running also right now is we've been living in a La Nina situation in the oceans since 2016, which was the last El Nino. What will happen is the El Nino will come back and the oceans will vent off massive heat. So between the heat, the carbon dioxide, and what I have as a theory is the sunspots, the brightening sun is happening right now. Sunspots are increasing and will increase until 2025. If you get all those three together, the El Nino, you get the heating, and you get sunspots, you're going to have a massive, terrible situation going on. And our leaders are doing nothing, and we literally could die as a result of that. Because it's not just that. It's the feedback loops that happen with that as well. There's many feedback loops, such as more heat leads to more ocean melting, which leads to more blue oceans, such as in the Arctic, and it makes it even hotter. So it just keeps building on itself. The hotter it gets, the more ocean or ice melts, the hotter it gets. You know, it keeps going, looping back. You also, with loss of ice in the glaciers around the world and in the Himalayas and all, you have loss of albedo. Right now, the Arctic is heating up 4 times faster than the rest of the world. So it's northern Greenland, north of Greenland, yesterday or this week, it was 60 degrees, I think it was. And they melted enough ice there to cover the entire state of West Virginia, if you look that up on a map. There's enough ice melted in 1 week to cover the state of West Virginia in 1 foot of water. That's how much ice has been melting around, just in Greenland itself. So also, when the atmosphere heats up in the Arctic, much of the heat, or almost all the heat, goes in devoted to melting the ice. And the temperature there is a constant 32 degrees until you melt the ice. Then it has a potential going up to 70 degrees. And once you lose the cooling effect of the Arctic, then it affects everything else worldwide, jet stream patterns, and you name it. So Antarctica, if that melts, West Antarctica is good for 3.2 meters of sea level rise, which is 10.5 feet. All of Antarctica has 230 feet of potential sea level rise. Greenland, if that all melted, that's 20 feet of sea level rise. And what no one else is factoring in are the world's mountain glaciers, such as the Andes, the Himalayas, the Alps, the Pyrenees, things like that, and the Rockies here in the United States. So loss of albedo, will happen in the poles, the Himalayas, and the Andes, and everywhere else, and that just contributes to more heating, and because now you have ground exposed instead of the sun being reflected back into the atmosphere or out into space. So with increased heat, you have crop losses, you have reduction in yield. You also have massive livestock loss with heating. They, just like humans, have a wet bulb effect, and there's a certain temperature where they no longer can survive, and they'll just drop over dead. They don't have traditionally shade here in the United States. Farmers are being stupid. They should create a square every so many yards or whatever with a tree in the middle, or a couple trees, so that the cows can hang out in the shade at least. But that doesn't happen in the United States. It's just wide open fields, and they're suffering immensely now. East Antarctica and Madagascar, East Africa and Madagascar You have Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia going through massive amounts of starvation, and it's going to get much, much, much worse by September. You have fires in the Taiga region, which is 50 to 70 degrees north in latitude, the forest regions, and they're on fire. You have the peat fires, which are zombie fires in Siberia, which don't go out even in the winter. They just burn underground, and then they erupt in the spring and summer and lead to massive amounts of carbon dioxide being put and carbon being put in the atmosphere in the form of methane or carbon dioxide. You also have permafrost thawing in the northern regions, and that has massive amounts of methane in it, carbon dioxide, and also, depending on whether the bacteria affect it right away, if it doesn't, it goes up as methane. If it does, it goes up carbon dioxide, and also nitrous oxide. The media around here only covers what's going on with climate change, and they mention the word climate change because they can no longer ignore it. I mean, it's so severe right now in the northern hemisphere that they can no longer ignore it. To do so is just turning a blind eye totally. There are no specials by the media. They don't do any specials about talking about climate change and just have an hour devoted to explaining what's going on. And if you do have people on, it's really poor explanations. They aren't experts of what's going on, and they aren't real, and they won't be honest about what's happening in the world. If you look at a Roger Hallam interview back in 2 years ago, I think it was, with the BBC. Check that out on YouTube, and he explains as to what's going to happen, and everyone's like, poo-poo, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. Well, what he said is actually starting to come true now, and you can see it going to happen. So look up the BBC interview 2 years ago, Roger Hallam, very informative, and the BBC interviewer was very harsh on him and just basically laughing at him. And you don't laugh at someone who actually knows what they're talking about. So there are no actions being taken. The media doesn't have activists on, or some scientists. Just because you're a doctor and whatever, they gave you a little piece of paper and you're living your ivory tower, but you can't connect the dots. Whereas the activists actually have been studying this stuff, and many of the scientists or professors around the country can too. But you got to be able to connect the dots and see the whole system, and try to figure out which way we're headed and things like that. Traditionally, your scientists know all about carbon dioxide in the Arctic, or just this or just that, and they don't see the broad scope of things. So you kind of need activists as interviews too, as to what's going on. Fossil fuel companies over the last, since 1970s, have made $3 billion in profits per day. The fossil fuel companies, the oil and gas companies and coal companies, are making $3 billion in profit per day. That's where your money's going. If you go to the gas pumps and say, oh, those prices are too high, that's because they're making record profits. In the United States, the oil companies made record profits in the first quarter of 2022. And what we need to do is actually the first step, and this is what Joe Biden's refusing to do, or anyone in Congress, or anyone around the world are refusing to stop subsidies to the fossil fuel industries. Understand this. They're making record profits, and we're still subsidizing with tax dollars around the world, and especially here in the United States. So we give them our money, they do the researches to find where, and drilling to find out where the oil is, which we don't need any more exploratory drilling. We have enough oil as a potential already where the oil wells are and the gas wells are to finish us off well over. I mean, there's enough there to make us extinct. But nope, we're going to keep doing it, and we're going to keep subsidizing the fossil fuel industries that are making record profits. So right now we're playing Russian roulette with our lives. In Russian roulette, traditionally, if you know what that is, you take a revolver and you put one bullet in, and you spin the tumbler and you pull the trigger, and if it goes off, then you lost. But if it doesn't, then you go on to the next round. Well, right now, instead of one bullet in the chamber, we got 6 bullets in the chamber, and there's no chance of surviving this if we keep on this path. So we're playing Russian roulette, and it's not much of a game because you're going to spin it, pull the trigger, and that's it. That's all she wrote. So we are headless right now. There are no leaders, there's no one around that actually knows what they're talking about or are willing to take action and stand up to the fossil fuel industry and the greed and corruption, because what will happen is that they'll be thrown out of the party or voted out in the next election, or worse, threatened with their lives. But we're headless right now. We need people to be strong and stand up and do a Roger type interview, or interviews that you hear online. Environmental Coffee House online, really great. If you go onto YouTube, really great speakers. Peter Carter, Paul Beckwith, there's whole bunches of them. And let's see here. So there are no major leaders. There are no major leaders worldwide, and especially here in the United States, that actually are willing to take action. And the sad thing is, too, there's no local leaders as around the country also. Yeah, you pockets of people, but for the majority. There's no local leaders willing to do the easy stuff and change things and insulate or try to mitigate or adjust to what's coming our way concerning climate change. And that would be greening up the environment and instituting tax breaks and things like that for people for easy ideas. And I talked about that, I think it was 3 talks ago. So, you know, we're headless and we're heading the wrong way and we're playing Russian roulette. So things are looking good. Let's attack uphill into a defensive position and not think about the consequences rather than shift our tactics and go somewhere else. Let's just keep doing infrastructure and not worry about, you know, making money for our corporations and things like that rather than attacking the real issue, which is climate change. So go ahead, attack that position and you will not survive. I'll catch you next week. That'll be July 28th. And that'll be number 190. See you later. This was number 189.